Fake checks again? The words echoed through the sterile, brightly lit walls of the First National Bank, cutting through the calm like a razor. Vanessa Clark, the poised and confident woman standing at the counter, didn't flinch. Her expression remained steady, betraying none of the anger she felt inside. The bank teller, a young blonde man with a look of arrogant superiority, waved a stack of checks in the air, his voice rising with each word. "You're trying to pull the same scam again. We can't process these." His words were loud, a deliberate attempt to humiliate her, the tone laced with something darker prejudice. The eyes of the other customers in the bank shifted towards her, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Vanessa could feel the weight of their judgment. But it wasn't just the words that stung. It was the way he looked at her, like she didn't belong here, like she was an intruder in a world that she owned. Fake checks? The phrase hung in the air like an accusation, seeping into every corner of the room. But Vanessa wasn't about to let this slide. Not today. Not after everything she had built. She stood tall, her calm demeanor never faltering. The teller continued his tirade, unaware of the storm he was about to unleash. Vanessa took a slow breath, her mind calculating the next steps in this game of power. The tension was palpable, but she wasn't just here to get her money. She was here to make a point. "Let me speak to your manager," she said, her voice unwavering. The words were simple, but they carried an authority that silenced the room. The teller hesitated, glancing around nervously as if he had expected her to break down, to beg for some kind of explanation. But Vanessa was not that woman. Not anymore. "Now," she added, the word hanging in the air like a command. The teller, realizing he was out of his depth, reluctantly nodded and turned to call for the manager. But as he did, something caught Vanessa's eye. The security guard, a tall man with a suspicious look in his eyes, was already walking toward her. He had the look of someone who was ready to escalate this situation. Someone who wasn't used to seeing people like Vanessa walk through these doors without fear. Vanessa didn't flinch. She didn't move. She just waited. She had been here before, many times, in different forms, in different battles. The world had never been kind to people like her, black women, who dared to rise above their station. But Vanessa wasn't just any black woman. She was the CEO of this bank. And today, the world would know it. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. It was her assistant, Carla. "Protocol 6 activated," the message read. Vanessa nodded imperceptibly. The game had already begun. Moments later, the manager arrived. He was a middle-aged man, balding and trying his best to appear authoritative, but the flicker of nervousness in his eyes gave him away. He addressed Vanessa with a condescending smile, trying to act as though this was all a misunderstanding. "I'm terribly sorry about the inconvenience, ma'am. Let's get this sorted out." But Vanessa wasn't interested in apologies. "You don't get to apologize," she said coldly, cutting him off mid-sentence. The room fell silent. The manager shifted uncomfortably. "I'm the CEO of this bank," Vanessa continued, her voice steady, every word like a hammer striking against the fragile facade of his power. "And you've just made the worst mistake of your life." The manager's face drained of color as the reality of what she had just said sank in. But before he could say anything, Vanessa's assistant, Carla, sent her another message. "Security footage is being pulled. HR is on alert." The trap had been set, and the walls were closing in. Vanessa could see the realization dawning in the eyes of the staff around her. They knew who she was now. They had no idea who they had just crossed. The silence in the room was deafening, and for a brief moment, Vanessa let the weight of it wash over her. Then she turned her attention back to the manager. "I own this bank," she said, her voice rising slightly but still calm, still composed. "And you're fired." The words hit harder than any physical blow. The manager's face contorted, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. But no words came. He stood there, powerless, as Vanessa turned and walked out of the bank, her head held high. The murmurs in the room grew louder as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in. They had witnessed the unthinkable. A black woman, humiliated and dismissed by the very people who thought they held the power, turning the tables with nothing but the truth and the power of her position. Vanessa's phone buzzed again. Carla had one more message. "The bank's reputation is secured. Everything's been documented." Vanessa smiled slightly. Today had been a victory, but it was just the beginning. This wasn't just about the money. It was about taking back control. And now, everyone would know that the rules had changed. The manager stood frozen, his face drained of color, the weight of Vanessa's words still hanging heavily in the air. She could see the gears turning in his mind, his eyes darting around the room, looking for a way out, but there was no escape. The reality was clear now. He had just tried to humiliate the wrong person, and the consequences were unfolding in real time. Vanessa stood tall, her gaze never wavering from his, and the silence in the room was deafening. It felt as though the entire world had paused. She could feel the tension building, the atmosphere thickening with every passing second. This was the moment where everything changed. The moment where power was no longer something to be begged for, but something to be taken. The manager, still stammering for words, took a tentative step forward, his voice trembling. "Ma'am, I didn't know," he faltered, the words caught in his throat. Vanessa remained silent, her expression unreadable, as the staff behind him shifted uncomfortably, some of them avoiding her gaze. She could see the realization dawning on them. They had crossed a line they shouldn't have, and now they were witnesses to a shift in the balance of power. She had given them the benefit of the doubt, hoping they would change. But today, they had shown her their true colors. The truth was, this wasn't the first time Vanessa had been underestimated. It wasn't the first time her worth had been questioned simply because of her appearance. She had learned to navigate these situations with grace, with patience. But today, something inside her had snapped. This was no longer just about proving her own worth. It was about sending a message. The manager still looked at her, wide-eyed, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for his phone, no doubt to try and salvage the situation. Vanessa didn't give him the chance. She already knew the game he was trying to play. The text messages, the calls, the scripted apologies, it was all part of the same old routine. She had seen it 1,000 times before, but this time there would be no easy way out. "You can apologize all you want," Vanessa said, her voice calm but heavy with authority. "But it won't change what you did. It won't take back the disrespect, the judgment, the assumption that I don't belong here." Her words were like a quiet storm, each one landing with the force of a truth that could not be ignored. The manager's hand froze over the phone, his face now a mixture of frustration and fear. The reality of what was happening hit him harder than any reprimand ever could. This wasn't just a customer complaint. This was an awakening. Vanessa wasn't a typical client. She was the reason this bank existed, the reason this institution stood tall. She was the one who had built it from the ground up, and yet they had dared to treat her as if she were nothing more than a common thief. That thought alone made her blood boil. "I don't need your apology," Vanessa continued, her tone steady but firm. "What I need is for you to understand that people like me don't just exist to be disregarded. We don't just exist to fit into the neat little boxes that society has built for us. You think you can belittle me because of the way I look? Because of the way I walk into a room without an entourage? Without the flashy clothes and jewelry? You have no idea who I am. You have no idea what I've sacrificed to get here." Her words were sharp, cutting through the layers of prejudice that had clouded the room. The bank manager opened his mouth again, but this time, no words came out. The silence was so thick that it seemed to suffocate him. Vanessa could see the change in him, the way his expression shifted from denial to realization. He was beginning to understand the gravity of the mistake he had made, but it was too late. He had crossed a line, and now he would pay the price. Vanessa glanced at her watch. The time was ticking away, each second that passed adding more weight to the situation. She could hear the faint sound of footsteps approaching from the hallway. It was Carla, her assistant, and the look on Carla's face was one of quiet satisfaction. Everything was proceeding as planned. Vanessa had activated Protocol 6, a set of procedures that ensured every move she made would be documented, every word logged, every action recorded. It was a precautionary measure, one that had served her well in the past. The system had already begun to pull up security footage, had already started pulling internal audit logs, and had already alerted the board. This was no longer just a personal confrontation. This was an organizational shift. The bank manager's phone buzzed, a call from someone higher up, but he didn't answer it. His eyes remained locked on Vanessa, his expression a mix of disbelief and dread. Finally, he spoke, his voice barely a whisper. I didn't mean to." Vanessa cut him off with a sharp look. "You didn't mean to?" she echoed, her voice low but packed with authority. "Do you think that excuses what you did? Do you think that makes it all better? You treated me like I was invisible, like I didn't belong. You saw the color of my skin and decided that I was just another person to dismiss. But I'm not just anyone. I own this bank. And this place, this institution is going to change because of you. Because of people like you. Her words hung in the air like a challenge, a declaration of war on the very system that had tried to hold her down. The room had gone eerily silent, every eye now focused on Vanessa, every ear straining to hear her next move. The manager finally looked away, unable to meet her gaze any longer, but it was too late. Vanessa had already won. Vanessa stood there, her gaze unwavering, as the manager fumbled with his phone, trying desperately to make sense of the situation he had just stumbled into. The room was thick with tension, the silence now an oppressive force that everyone seemed unwilling to break. The air felt heavier, as if the very walls of the bank had closed in on him, trapping him in the consequences of his own ignorance. His fingers shook slightly as he glanced up at Vanessa, but no words came. She had made her point, and the game was already in motion. "You know," Vanessa said slowly, breaking the silence, her voice calm but heavy with the weight of her words, "this isn't just about me. It's about every person who has ever been dismissed like this. Every single person who has walked through these doors and been treated like they don't belong. Every person who has had their worth questioned simply because of how they look or where they come from. You've just been a part of that system. And today, that system ends." The room seemed to breathe with her words, the other staff members shifting uncomfortably, clearly feeling the shift in power, but no one dared speak up. It was as if Vanessa had placed them all under an invisible spotlight, and they were afraid of what the truth might reveal. The manager finally put the phone down, his hands now resting against the counter, his posture sagging with defeat. He had no words left. Vanessa could see the fear in his eyes, the realization that his position, his authority, had been reduced to nothing in a matter of moments. But she wasn't finished. Not yet. "Get the rest of your staff here," she said sharply, her voice cutting through the stillness. "Now. I want them all in this room, all of them, and I want them to hear what I have to say." Her words were clear, direct, and filled with the kind of authority that could not be ignored. The manager hesitated for just a moment, then quickly nodded, his face pale, as he moved toward the back office. Vanessa could see the way his body language had changed. He had lost his composure. And with each step he took, the room seemed to grow even quieter. The seconds stretched on endlessly as Vanessa stood there, unwavering, her mind already moving to the next phase of this confrontation. This wasn't about a small misunderstanding anymore. It was about power, about who held it, who controlled it, and who had been denied it for far too long. Soon the staff members began filing in, their faces nervous and uncertain, their eyes avoiding Vanessa's. The manager returned with them, standing off to the side, no longer holding any real authority in the situation. Vanessa took a slow, deliberate step forward, her presence filling the room, commanding attention. "Let me make this clear for all of you," she began, her voice rising just enough to capture everyone's focus. "I built this institution. This place, this bank, is mine. I am the reason it stands here today. I own it. And none of you get to decide who belongs here and who doesn't. Your job is to serve the clients, not to judge them, not to make assumptions based on the way they look, or the way they speak, or the color of their skin. Today, you have all witnessed the ugly side of the system you've been a part of, and today, that system is changing." The words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, there was no sound at all, just the weight of Vanessa's message settling over the group. She could see the guilt beginning to spread across their faces, the way their eyes darted nervously from one another, unsure of how to respond. But Vanessa was done waiting. "It's time for change," she continued, her voice resolute. "And change starts now. You," she pointed to the manager, who was still standing off to the side. "You're fired. Effective immediately. Leave. Now." The manager's face flushed a deep red, his mouth opening and closing as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. But Vanessa wasn't done. "And as for the rest of you," she said, turning her attention to the staff, her eyes cold and unforgiving, "if you want to stay here, you will need to understand that things will be different from now on. There will be no more tolerance for this kind of treatment, no more allowing people to be humiliated simply because of who they are. If you can't accept that, then you can leave too." The room was dead silent. Vanessa let the words sink in, the power of her position radiating from her every word. She could see the staff members exchanging glances, some of them clearly uncomfortable, others unsure of how to respond. Vanessa wasn't expecting them to jump up and cheer. She wasn't expecting them to thank her. But she knew that what she had done in this room would echo far beyond these walls. It would send a message not just to the staff in this bank, but to anyone who had ever been dismissed, overlooked, or underestimated. Change was coming, and it would not be denied. The manager, still reeling from the shock, finally turned and walked out, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The rest of the staff stood frozen in place, unsure of what to do next. Vanessa took a deep breath, standing tall, and then she turned and walked out of the room, her head held high. She didn't need to say another word. The silence that followed spoke louder than anything she could have said. The message was clear. The era of tolerating disrespect was over, and from this moment on, the rules would be rewritten. Vanessa walked through the now silent lobby, her steps measured and deliberate, each one echoing like a declaration of the new order she had just set in motion. Behind her, the murmurs of the staff grew louder, but she didn't turn around. She didn't need to. They knew what had just happened, even if they weren't sure of how to process it yet. She reached the door, her fingers brushing the cool glass as she paused for a moment. The weight of what she had just done was settling in, but Vanessa knew there was no turning back now. She could feel the eyes of everyone in the room still on her, a mixture of disbelief, fear, and curiosity. She had exposed something that most people were content to keep hidden. She had shown them that the power they thought they held was nothing more than an illusion. "This is only the beginning," she muttered to herself under her breath. The message had been sent. But she had no intention of stopping here. She wasn't just going to change the way this bank operated. She was going to change the entire system, starting with this very institution. She stepped out into the bright, warm sunlight, feeling the weight of the world fall away from her shoulders. For the first time in a long time, Vanessa felt truly free. She wasn't just a CEO, she was a force to be reckoned with. And she wasn't going to stop until everyone who had ever doubted her, everyone who had ever treated her like she was less than, was forced to reckon with her power. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she pulled it out, her eyes scanning the screen. It was a message from Carla. "The team is on standby. Everything's being documented. Internal audit is already reviewing." Vanessa smiled slightly. She had known that Carla would be one step ahead, always ready to back her up when the time came. It wasn't just about what happened here today. It was about ensuring that there was no record of anyone ever being able to deny her worth again. She hit reply, her fingers tapping swiftly on the screen. "Make sure it's all logged. I want every word on record." Another buzz, another confirmation. This was how she did things now, methodically, carefully, and always with the long term in mind. She wasn't going to let her moment of triumph slip away. But there was no time to rest. Vanessa had already set her sights on the next move. She needed to make sure that this wasn't just a small victory, it had to be a turning point, something that would ripple across the entire banking system and beyond. She couldn't be the only one standing up to this kind of treatment. This kind of behavior needed to be eradicated from the ground up, and she was just the person to do it. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of an approaching car, and she looked up to see a sleek black sedan pulling up to the curb. The door opened, and out stepped a familiar figure, someone she had known for years, someone who had always stood by her side. It was Carl, her most trusted advisor, and a man who had seen everything she had gone through. "Vanessa," he said, his voice filled with admiration. "I've been following the whole thing. You were incredible in there. The way you handled everything, it was like watching a master at work." She gave him a brief, tight-lipped smile. "Thanks, Carl, but this is just the start. We've got a lot of work to do." Carl nodded, understanding the gravity of her words. "I know. I've been in contact with the board. They're on your side. Everyone's on your side now. You've got the power, Vanessa. They can't ignore you anymore." She looked at him, her expression hardening with determination. "I know, but I want more than that. I want them to respect me. I want them to understand that I'm not just here to play the game. I'm here to change the game." Carl raised an eyebrow. "You're not planning to take over the world, are you?" She smiled, a glint of fire in her eyes. "Not the world, just this system. One piece at a time, starting with the bank, then the rest will follow." Carl chuckled, clearly impressed by her resolve. "Well, I'm with you every step of the way. Let me know what you need." Vanessa nodded, already turning her attention back to the task at hand. The battle was far from over. There were more battles to fight, more power to reclaim, and more lives to change. And she would be the one leading the charge. As she stepped into the car, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. But it wasn't the calm of victory. It was the calm before the storm, because the real work was just beginning. She wasn't going to rest until every corner of the system had been shaken to its core. "Let's get to work," she said quietly as the car door closed behind her. And as the car drove off into the city, she knew that the world, as they knew it, was about to change. The city skyline stretched out before Vanessa as the car sped through the busy streets. The weight of the day still pressed down on her, but her mind was already moving ahead, calculating the next steps in her plan. This moment, this small victory, was nothing more than the beginning of something much larger. She had set the stage, but now she needed to ensure the message reverberated far beyond these walls. It was time to make the entire system take notice. She wasn't going to let herself be ignored again. The meeting with the board was scheduled for the following morning, and she needed to be prepared. This was where the real challenge lay. As much as she had dominated the conversation at the bank, now it was time to take on the corporate giants, who had a hand in shaping the very system that had tried to push her down. The world was watching. The question was, would they stand with her or against her? She knew the stakes. She had spent years building Summit Enterprises, and in the blink of an eye, she had shattered any illusion of the world seeing her as anything less than a powerful force. The decision now was whether she would continue as just the CEO of a successful company or whether she would become the symbol of something much bigger, someone who could reshape the corporate world itself. The car turned a corner and pulled up to a sleek, glass building, its modern design an obvious symbol of wealth and influence. Vanessa stepped out, her heels clicking sharply against the pavement as she walked into the building. The lobby was grand, the marble floors gleaming under the bright lights, but Vanessa barely noticed. She was here for one reason, to make sure her next move would be unstoppable. The boardroom was up on the top floor, and as she made her way up in the elevator, she could feel the weight of the moment settling in. The doors opened, and she was greeted by the familiar faces of the board members, some of whom had been with her since the early days of Summit Enterprises. Their eyes followed her as she entered the room, but there was no hesitation in her step. She wasn't here to be questioned, to justify herself. She was here to take control. As she sat down at the head of the table, she glanced around at the faces staring back at her. There were those who had supported her every step of the way, and there were those who had held back, doubting her ability to lead, unsure of what she could achieve. It didn't matter anymore. Today, they would all understand exactly who she was. "I'm not here to make excuses," Vanessa began, her voice steady and commanding. "I'm here to make sure you all understand something very important. The way this system works, this corporate system, this banking system, this system that has held people like me down for so long, will no longer stand. I'm going to change it, and I'm starting with this company." The room was silent. No one spoke, but the tension in the air was thick. She could see the skepticism in some of their eyes, the resistance already forming. They were comfortable with the way things had always been. They had built their empires on the backs of people who were overlooked, dismissed, ignored. But not anymore. "You all know what happened at the bank today," she continued, her gaze moving from one board member to the next. "And that was just the beginning. I've had enough of playing by their rules. I'm rewriting the game, and I'm not doing it alone. I need you with me, or we'll be left behind." The silence that followed was suffocating. The board members exchanged glances, but no one spoke. Vanessa wasn't about to let this drag on. She had come too far to be ignored now. "I'm not asking for your approval," she said, her voice unwavering. "I'm telling you what's going to happen. We are going to reshape this company, starting with how we operate, how we treat our employees, how we treat our clients. This is not a company for the privileged few anymore. This is a company for everyone. I will not tolerate discrimination, bias, or exclusion in any form. If you can't get on board with that, you can leave." Her words hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. She could feel the tension, the pushback from some of the more conservative members of the board, but she didn't flinch. She knew what they were thinking. They were wondering if she was serious, wondering if she could really make this happen, wondering if she had the power to change the very system they had built their careers on. But what they didn't realize was that she already had that power. The question wasn't whether she could make the change, it was whether they would stand with her or stand in her way. Finally, one of the board members, Robert, a man she had worked closely with for years, cleared his throat and leaned forward. "Vanessa, we're with you," he said, his voice measured but sincere. "We've always been with you. But this is going to take time. This kind of shift, it won't be easy. You can't change the system overnight." Vanessa nodded, her eyes never leaving his. "I don't need time," she said softly, her words cutting through the room like a blade. "I've waited long enough." There was a long pause before the room finally erupted into conversation. The resistance was still there, but it was weaker now. Vanessa had shown them her resolve, and they had no choice but to follow her lead. She wasn't going to wait for permission. She was going to take what was hers, and she was going to do it now. As the meeting continued, Vanessa felt the weight of the world slowly lift off her shoulders. She had done it. She had taken the first step in a journey that would change everything, and now the real work would begin. The days that followed were a whirlwind of meetings, emails, and late-night strategy sessions. Vanessa had ignited a firestorm, and now she was determined to keep it burning. The board was on her side, but the real challenge was just beginning. She knew that change would never come without resistance. The corporate world was entrenched in its old ways, and no matter how much power she wielded, there would be those who fought to maintain the status quo. But Vanessa was ready for the battle. She had been preparing for this moment her entire life. She was determined to not just play the game, but to change it entirely. As she sat in her office late one evening, staring out at the city skyline, Vanessa reflected on how far she had come. The woman who had once been overlooked, underestimated, and dismissed by people who never thought she belonged in the room was now the one in charge. She had taken on a world that wasn't built for people like her, and now it was bending to her will. But she wasn't finished yet. There was so much more to do. The message she had sent to the bank was only the beginning. Now it was time to make the changes she had promised. She leaned back in her chair, running her fingers over the edge of the desk, and began to make her plans for the next phase. The first priority was to implement a comprehensive anti-bias policy across the company. Every employee needed to understand that discrimination, in any form, would not be tolerated. No more casual racism, no more microaggressions, no more passing judgment based on appearances. This was going to be a place where everyone, regardless of their background, could thrive. But changing the culture of a company wasn't going to be easy. It wasn't just about setting new rules. It was about changing people's hearts and minds. It was about teaching them to see people for who they truly were, not the stereotypes they had grown up believing. Vanessa knew this would take time, but she was patient. She had waited her entire life for this moment. A few weeks later, the first round of company-wide workshops began. Vanessa didn't just want to implement policies. She wanted to make people feel the weight of the responsibility that came with those policies. She wanted them to see why change was necessary. She wanted them to understand that, just like in that bank, the world was watching, and it was no longer acceptable to sit by and allow injustice to continue. At the start of each session, she delivered a speech that was both simple and profound. "We are here to learn what it means to be truly inclusive. We are here to change not just the way we work, but the way we see the world. Because if we are going to be the leaders of tomorrow, we have to start by being the change we want to see." Each time she spoke, she could feel the room shift. At first, there was resistance, a kind of unease that always followed change. But as the sessions went on, she could see the transformation in the faces of the employees. Some were uncomfortable, but others were eager to learn. And that was the breakthrough moment she needed. She wasn't asking for perfection, she was asking for progress. As weeks turned into months, the results were undeniable. The company's atmosphere began to shift. Employees who had once been silent in the face of discrimination were now speaking up. Conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion were no longer uncomfortable or avoided. They were happening openly and honestly. Vanessa knew this wasn't going to be the end of her fight. She still had a long way to go before the corporate world would truly be a place of equality. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of hope. She wasn't just dreaming of change anymore, she was making it happen. One by one, the policies she had put in place began to make waves throughout the company. And then, something unexpected happened. Other companies started to take notice. At first, it was just a few smaller firms asking her for advice, seeking her guidance on how to create similar changes within their own organizations. But soon, larger companies started to approach her, seeing her as a trailblazer, someone who had managed to do what so many others had failed to do, create real, lasting change. It was then that Vanessa realized the full extent of her power. This wasn't just about Summit Enterprises anymore. She was a leader in a global movement, and her influence was spreading far beyond the walls of her own company. And yet, despite all the progress she had made, she knew there was still more work to do. The journey was far from over. She had made a dent in the system, but the system itself was massive, and she had to keep pushing, keep fighting, keep breaking down barriers. As she looked out over the city again, Vanessa thought back to that day at the bank, when she had stood her ground, refusing to be dismissed or ignored. That moment had been a turning point, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been underestimated or dismissed because of who they were. And now, as she stood at the forefront of a movement that was changing the corporate world, Vanessa knew that the real battle was only just beginning. Vanessa stood in the heart of her office, overlooking the city below. The skyscrapers that dotted the skyline, once symbols of untouchable power, now felt like playgrounds for change. She had taken the first step, and now the world was watching her every move. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, breaking her reverie. It was Carla. "The board has confirmed the meeting for tomorrow. They're expecting you," the message read. Vanessa took a deep breath. The weight of the upcoming meeting hung over her like a storm cloud, but she wasn't afraid. She had always thrived in these moments. She wasn't just walking into that room as the CEO of Summit Enterprises. She was walking in as a symbol of the transformation she was leading, a trailblazer for the corporate world, and she was about to make her next move. She had set the wheels in motion, but this meeting wasn't just about reaffirming her leadership. It was about taking control of the future of her industry. She had already started seeing changes within her company, but now it was time to push those changes beyond Summit Enterprises. The message she had delivered to her board had been clear. It was time for a new era in corporate America. Vanessa wasn't asking for permission. She was setting the course. She wasn't just leading a business. She was leading a revolution. The thought of it sent a rush of adrenaline through her veins. As she prepared for the meeting the next morning, Vanessa found herself reflecting on the road that had brought her here. She had been that woman at the bank, dismissed and humiliated, but she had turned that humiliation into fuel for a larger purpose. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about everyone who had been overlooked, underestimated, or excluded. She was building something that would outlast her, something that would stand as a testament to the power of resilience and the strength of the human spirit. The day of the meeting arrived, and as Vanessa walked into the boardroom, she was met with a sea of faces, some familiar, some new. The atmosphere was thick with anticipation. Everyone knew that this was a pivotal moment, but no one knew exactly what would come next. Vanessa wasn't concerned with their expectations. She had already decided the direction she would take. As she took her seat at the head of the table, she met the gaze of each board member. She could sense the uncertainty in the room, but she also knew that it was exactly what she needed. Change wasn't meant to be comfortable. It was meant to challenge the status quo, to disrupt the complacency that had allowed inequality and bias to thrive for so long. "Good morning, everyone," Vanessa began, her voice steady but firm. "I hope you're all ready for what's about to unfold." She let the words hang in the air, letting them settle before continuing. "I've been hearing a lot of talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion recently. I've seen policies implemented on paper, but I've also seen the same old biases continue to play out in boardrooms, in hiring practices, and in the way employees are treated across industries. It's time for us to stop talking about change and actually make it happen. And it's going to start with us." She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. She could feel the room shift, the air thick with a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. But this wasn't the time for hesitation. She had come this far, and now was the time to act. "We are not going to wait for change to trickle down from the top," Vanessa continued. "We're going to lead it. From this moment forward, Summit Enterprises will be a model for what true inclusion looks like. We will be the example for how business can be done in a way that respects and values every individual, regardless of their background. And we will hold ourselves accountable for that vision every single day." A murmur ran through the room, but Vanessa didn't let it deter her. This was the moment she had been building toward, and she wasn't about to back down. "This means we will implement policies that don't just check boxes, they will challenge systems of power that have kept people out. We will provide equal opportunities for advancement, regardless of race, gender, or socioeconomic background. We will make sure that our employees feel heard, valued, and empowered. And we will do this not just for the good of the company, but for the good of society as a whole. This is how we will stay ahead of the competition by doing what is right, not what is easy. She could see the hesitation on some of their faces, the resistance to such a radical shift. But Vanessa knew that was only natural. Change was never easy, and it was always met with skepticism. The real question was whether they were brave enough to rise to the occasion. "I'm not asking you to agree with everything I'm saying," Vanessa continued. "I'm asking you to take action, to be a part of something bigger than just profits and quarterly earnings. We have the opportunity to set the standard for corporate America, to show that success isn't just about the bottom line. It's about doing the right thing, even when it's difficult. And if you're not willing to commit to that vision, then I will make sure that you are replaced with someone who is." She leaned forward, locking eyes with the board members one by one. "This is my company, and I will lead it to a future where justice, equality, and opportunity are the foundation of everything we do. If you're with me, we will make history. If not, it's time for you to step aside." The room fell silent as her words hung in the air. Vanessa knew that she had made her point. She had laid out her vision for the future, and now it was time to see who would follow her. The road ahead was going to be long and challenging, but Vanessa was ready. She wasn't just going to change the corporate world, she was going to redefine it. As the meeting continued, she could feel the shift happening. The resistance was still there, but it was weakening. Vanessa knew that in time, those who didn't share her vision would be replaced by those who did. And when that day came, Summit Enterprises would not just be a company, it would be a movement. Vanessa walked out of the boardroom, feeling the weight of the decisions she had just made. She had set the course for the future of Summit Enterprises, but she knew the real work was only just beginning. As she stepped into the elevator, she couldn't help but replay the meeting in her mind. There had been some resistance, but the moment of doubt had passed, and now it was clear this was her company, and she was in charge. But this wasn't just about changing Summit Enterprises. This was about sending a message to the entire corporate world. The road ahead would be long, and there would be more challenges, but she wasn't intimidated. She had already proven that she could rise above adversity. She had already shown that she would fight for what she believed in, and now the world was watching. As the elevator doors closed, she felt a sense of determination. She wasn't going to stop until her vision for change became a reality. She wasn't just looking to make her company a model for success. She wanted to transform an entire industry, and that required more than just strong leadership, it required bold action. Vanessa got into her car and headed back to her office, but as the car sped through the streets, her thoughts kept drifting to the next steps. She had already set the foundation for what was to come. The policies were in place, the workshops were happening, and now the question was how to take this momentum to the next level. Her phone buzzed, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was Carla again. "We've had a response from the media," the message read. "They're eager for an interview. This could be the moment to go public with your mission. What do you think?" Vanessa smiled slightly. This was exactly what she had been waiting for. The media was the key to reaching a wider audience. It was time to put her message into the world and show everyone that Summit Enterprises wasn't just another company, it was the start of a movement. She quickly responded to Carla, "Set it up. It's time." The next morning, Vanessa sat in front of the camera. The lights focused on her as the interviewer prepared to ask her questions. The crew was buzzing around, and there was an energy in the air, a sense that something big was about to happen. Vanessa adjusted herself in her seat, her confidence radiating. This wasn't just an interview. This was her chance to speak directly to the public, to let the world know what she was about and what she was fighting for. The interviewer, a seasoned journalist who had covered corporate leaders for years, looked at Vanessa with a mixture of curiosity and respect. "Vanessa, thank you for sitting down with us today. You've made waves in the business world recently with your statements about transforming corporate culture. What inspired this bold move?" Vanessa leaned forward slightly, her hands clasped on her lap. "Thank you for having me," she began, her voice steady and strong. "What inspired this move is simple. I've spent my entire career in a world that wasn't built for people like me. I've watched as doors were closed, opportunities were denied, and talent was overlooked simply because of who people were or how they looked. It's time to change that. It's time to create a corporate world where everyone has the same opportunities, where discrimination is no longer tolerated, and where success is determined by merit, not by background or appearances." The interviewer nodded, clearly impressed by her words. "And how do you plan to implement this vision?" she asked. Vanessa's eyes sparkled with determination. "We've already started. The policies are in place. We're building a culture where inclusivity isn't just a buzzword, it's a practice. We're conducting workshops to ensure that every employee understands the importance of diversity, equity, and inclusion. We're going beyond just lip service. We're making sure our actions match our words." The interviewer leaned in slightly. "But there are those who say these changes are difficult to implement and that they can't be achieved overnight. How do you respond to that?" Vanessa smiled, her expression unwavering. "It's true, change doesn't happen overnight, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't start. Every movement begins with one person willing to take a stand, and I'm taking that stand. I'm not asking for perfection, I'm asking for progress. Every day we take another step forward, and that's how change happens." The interviewer paused, then asked a question that Vanessa knew was coming. "Do you think this will set a new standard for other companies to follow?" Vanessa's gaze softened just a little, but her voice remained strong. "I don't just think it will, I know it will. This is bigger than just one company. This is about reshaping an entire system. When people see the results of what we're doing here, they will want to join in. This isn't just my vision, it's a vision for a better future for everyone in the corporate world." The interview continued for several more minutes, but Vanessa knew the message had been delivered. This was her moment to make sure that everyone understood that Summit Enterprises wasn't just a business, it was a revolution. As the cameras turned off, Vanessa felt a sense of accomplishment. She had done it. She had taken her message public, and now it was up to the world to decide how they would respond. But she had no doubt. This was the beginning of something monumental. She wasn't just going to change the game, she was going to create an entirely new one. Vanessa sat at her desk, staring at the emails that had flooded her inbox since the interview. The public had responded exactly as she expected. Some were skeptical, others were supportive, but most were just curious. Curiosity was a powerful thing, and Vanessa knew that it would lead to action. Change never came from the comfort zone. It came from challenging the norms, from questioning the very foundation on which the system stood. And now, the entire corporate world was watching. As she read through the emails, her phone buzzed with a new message from Carla. "We've just received an invitation for you to speak at the National Business Summit. They're calling you a game changer. They want you to address a room full of CEOs. This could be huge." Vanessa smiled to herself. This was it, the moment she had been waiting for. The National Business Summit was one of the most prestigious gatherings of business leaders in the country. To be invited to speak there wasn't just an honor. It was an opportunity to solidify her place as the leader of the movement she had started. She quickly typed back a response to Carla. "Set it up. I'll be there." As soon as the email was sent, Vanessa stood up and walked to the window of her office. The view from the top floor was always breathtaking. The sprawling city below her was a constant reminder of how much she had accomplished and how much more she still had to do. The world was changing, and she was at the forefront of that change. But there was still so much work to be done. She had fought to get here, and now she had to make sure her vision didn't just survive, it thrived. The next few weeks passed in a blur as Vanessa prepared for her speech at the National Business Summit. She knew that this was more than just a chance to share her ideas, it was a chance to challenge an entire industry, to make them see that the future of business had to be built on inclusivity and fairness, not outdated practices and biases. She worked tirelessly, perfecting her speech, practicing every word, every pause, until it felt as though it had been crafted in her very soul. The day of the summit arrived, and as Vanessa walked onto the stage, the weight of the moment hit her. The room was filled with some of the most powerful people in business, many of whom had built their empires by playing the game exactly how it had always been played. They were the gatekeepers, the decision-makers, the ones who had the power to shape the future. But today, they would hear from someone who wasn't content to follow the rules, someone who was rewriting the game. Vanessa stood at the podium, looking out at the sea of faces in front of her. The lights were bright, and the room was silent with anticipation. She took a deep breath, and then she began. "Good afternoon. I stand before you today not just as the CEO of Summit Enterprises, but as a woman who has spent her entire career fighting to prove that I belong in this room. For too long, the corporate world has been run by a system that values conformity over individuality, power over equity, and profit over people. But I'm here to tell you that we can no longer afford to operate under those outdated principles. The room was still, but Vanessa could feel the eyes on her, the weight of their skepticism pressing against her. She didn't flinch. This was her moment, and she was going to make sure they heard her. I'm here to tell you that the world is changing, whether you're ready or not. The companies that will thrive in the future are the ones that understand that diversity, equity, and inclusion aren't just buzzwords, they are the very foundation of a successful, sustainable business. If you're not making room at the table for everyone, then you're leaving money on the table. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Vanessa could see some people shifting in their seats, but she didn't stop. The time has come for us to stop making excuses, to stop hiding behind the belief that things are fine the way they are. They're not. We've been operating on systems that were never designed to be fair, to be just, to be equal, and we've seen the consequences of that. We've seen the stagnation. We've seen the missed opportunities. And we've seen the people who have been left behind. She paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. But this isn't just about doing the right thing, it's about doing the smart thing. Studies have shown time and time again that companies that prioritize diversity and inclusion are more innovative, more productive, and more profitable. So, if you're not prioritizing these values in your company, you're not just falling behind in the race for equality, you're falling behind in the race for success. Vanessa could see some of the faces in the crowd beginning to nod in agreement. She had their attention now, and she wasn't about to lose it. But it's not enough to just talk about diversity. It's not enough to just say you're inclusive. We need to make real, measurable changes. We need to ensure that everyone has the same opportunities to rise to the top, regardless of their background or where they come from. We need to create a system where merit is the only thing that matters, where talent is the only thing that determines who succeeds. The room was beginning to shift now. She could feel the change in the energy, the growing understanding that this wasn't just a speech, it was a call to action. I'm not asking you to change your companies overnight, Vanessa said, her voice softer but no less powerful. I'm asking you to commit to the process, to start the journey. Because if we all do our part, if we all make that commitment to create a fairer, more inclusive future, we can change the world, and we will. As she finished, there was a moment of stunned silence before the room erupted into applause. Vanessa stood there, letting the sound wash over her. She had done it. She had delivered her message to the people who had the power to change the corporate world, and she knew that things would never be the same again. She had sparked the beginning of a revolution, and this was only the beginning. Vanessa stepped off the stage, the applause still echoing in her ears. The National Business Summit had been a turning point, a milestone that signified not only her personal triumph but the beginning of a much larger movement. As she walked backstage, her heart raced. But it wasn't from nervousness anymore, it was from anticipation. She knew that her speech had struck a chord with the audience. She had seen it in their eyes, heard it in the way they reacted. The world was finally listening. Carla approached her as she made her way to the green room, her phone in hand, a broad smile on her face. That was incredible, Vanessa. The media outlets are already picking it up. People are talking. You've really done it now. Vanessa took a deep breath, letting the moment sink in. But her mind was already on the next steps. She wasn't interested in basking in the glow of applause for long. There was still too much work to do. This is just the beginning, Vanessa said, her voice steady, yet full of determination. We've created a spark, but now we need to fan the flames. The real work starts now. As she left the summit and returned to her office, she began to plan her next move. The corporate world was buzzing with the effects of her words. But Vanessa knew that lasting change wouldn't come from just a single speech. It had to be reinforced with action, policy, and a culture that could stand the test of time. Her phone rang again. This time, it was from Robert, one of the board members who had been in the meeting when she outlined her vision. Vanessa, Robert's voice crackled with energy. I've been getting calls from several large corporations. They want to know how they can implement what we've started here. They're interested in following your lead. This could be the start of something huge. Vanessa felt a sense of pride well up inside her. She had known that her message would resonate, but hearing that other companies wanted to follow her lead made it all feel real. That's exactly what we need, Vanessa replied. We're not just changing Summit Enterprises, we're changing the entire industry, and the more we get on board, the stronger our impact will be. Let's make sure we keep pushing forward. The conversation ended, and as she set down the phone, Vanessa felt the enormity of her responsibility settle over her. She wasn't just leading a company, she was leading a movement. The stakes were higher than they had ever been. As the weeks passed, the buzz surrounding Vanessa and Summit Enterprises continued to grow. Media outlets hailed her as a trailblazer, and other companies started to publicly commit to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. However, Vanessa knew that a mere commitment wasn't enough. She needed results. She called a meeting with her leadership team to discuss how they could turn their promises into tangible actions. "We've set the bar, but now it's time to make sure we're walking the talk," she told them. "We need to implement these changes across every department, from hiring to promotion to everyday office culture. This will be a company-wide effort, and everyone needs to be on board." The team nodded in agreement, ready to take the next steps. Vanessa knew the road ahead wouldn't be smooth. There would be setbacks, resistance, and challenges along the way. But she also knew that she had the support of her team and that she was not alone in this fight. As she continued to push forward with her mission, Vanessa became a symbol for the new wave of leadership that was sweeping across industries. Her dedication to fairness, equality, and opportunity inspired others to step up, to challenge the outdated systems that had long dominated the corporate world. At the same time, Vanessa kept her focus on the long-term goal, ensuring that the changes she had started didn't just make headlines, but created a ripple effect that would be felt for generations to come. One afternoon, as she was meeting with a group of executives from another company interested in partnering with Summit Enterprises on a new diversity initiative, Vanessa received a call from a reporter. "Vanessa," the reporter began, "we've been following your journey, and I have to ask what's next. You've started a movement, but where do you see this going?" Vanessa paused, taking a moment to reflect on the question. "What's next?" she echoed, her mind racing with possibilities. "What's next is that we keep moving forward. This isn't just a trend. This isn't just about one speech or one company. This is about creating a world where everyone has the same opportunities, where people aren't judged by the color of their skin, their gender, or their background. What's next is that we keep fighting until no one is left behind. We'll keep pushing, and we won't stop until the corporate world reflects the world we want to live in, one of equality, inclusion, and opportunity for all." The reporter was silent for a moment, clearly moved by her words. "That's powerful," they finally said, "and it's exactly what the world needs to hear." Vanessa smiled to herself, knowing that the impact of her message was spreading far and wide. But she also knew that this was just the beginning. The movement she had started was gaining momentum, and now it was time for the real change to begin. The corporate world had been forever altered, and Vanessa Clark would be the one to lead the charge into a new era of leadership and equality. Vanessa sat in her office, staring at the blueprints of the new diversity program she had been working on for the past several months. The work she had started was gaining momentum, but she knew that this was the most critical phase. It was one thing to get people to agree on the importance of change. It was another to embed that change into the very culture of an organization. She had seen many companies roll out diversity and inclusion initiatives before, only for them to fizzle out, forgotten, or half-heartedly implemented. This time would be different. Vanessa had built Summit Enterprises on the belief that leadership meant more than just profit margins. It meant having a genuine impact on people's lives. And now, she was determined to ensure that this mission spread beyond the walls of her company and reshaped the corporate landscape for good. As she reviewed the program's key components, she reflected on the countless conversations she had had with colleagues, allies, and critics alike over the last year. Many had questioned her approach. Some even ridiculed her for her idealism. But Vanessa knew that real change was always met with resistance. What mattered most was her unwavering commitment to the cause. It was no longer about proving a point to those who doubted her. It was about making sure that the changes she fought for would endure. Her office door opened, and Carla walked in with a stack of papers. "The board has approved the new initiatives," Carla said, her voice filled with excitement. "It's all set to roll out next month." Vanessa smiled, grateful for Carla's unwavering support. "Good. Let's make sure everything is in place to ensure a smooth launch," Vanessa replied. She stood and walked over to the large window overlooking the city. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the skyline. It was a beautiful sight, one that reminded her of just how far she had come. But she wasn't done yet. "I want to start making partnerships with other organizations," Vanessa continued. We need to make sure that the ripple effect of what we're doing here doesn't stop at Summit Enterprises. We need to reach out to other companies, show them that they can make this work too. Carla nodded. I've already reached out to a few major players in the industry. They're interested in collaborating. Vanessa turned, her gaze sharp and focused. We need more than interest, she said. We need commitment. We need to ensure they're not just paying lip service. We need them to take concrete steps and hold themselves accountable. Carla raised an eyebrow. You think they'll follow through? Vanessa crossed her arms, a confident smile playing on her lips. They won't have a choice. The world is changing, and they can either be a part of it or be left behind. The next several weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, strategy sessions, and planning. Vanessa's vision for a more inclusive corporate world was beginning to take shape, and more companies were starting to come on board. Summit Enterprises had become a symbol of what was possible when leadership was fueled by integrity, empathy, and the drive to create a more equitable world. The media attention had only intensified, with reporters eager to cover her next moves. Vanessa knew that the spotlight was on her, but it didn't intimidate her. She had worked too hard to get here, and now she was ready to take on the next phase of the journey. The day of the first official meeting with the other organizations came, and Vanessa was ready. As she walked into the conference room, she could feel the energy shift. These were some of the most influential leaders in the industry, people who had built their companies from the ground up just like her. But what set Vanessa apart from them was her clarity of vision. She wasn't here just to talk about change. She was here to make it happen. As the meeting began, Vanessa addressed the room with her usual confidence. We've made significant progress in our efforts to transform the way business is done, she began, her voice steady but filled with passion. But we are at a critical juncture. The world is watching, and the people who have been excluded, who have been overlooked, are finally speaking up. If we are to lead, we must show that we are ready to step up and make real, lasting changes. It's not enough to pay lip service to the idea of diversity and inclusion. We need to make sure that we are actively dismantling the systems that have kept people out for too long. The room was quiet as Vanessa's words sank in. Some of the leaders looked uncomfortable, but others were nodding in agreement. It was clear that there was a sense of urgency in the room. Our goal is not just to be better than the status quo, she continued. Our goal is to create a new standard. We are here to set a precedent that others can follow. We are here to prove that business can be both successful and inclusive, that they are not mutually exclusive. One of the leaders, a woman who had been known for her conservative approach to business, raised her hand. Vanessa, she said, her voice cautious but thoughtful, what you're asking for will take time. We have legacy systems, and we have a lot of employees who are used to doing things a certain way. How do you expect us to change all of that? Vanessa didn't hesitate. Change takes time, she replied, but change can't wait forever. Every day we delay is another day that people are left behind. It's about creating an environment where people can thrive, not just survive. And that requires all of us to rethink how we operate, from hiring practices to internal culture to leadership development. We can no longer afford to wait. There was a pause before another leader spoke up, his tone more supportive. You're right, he said. We've been talking about this for years, but we haven't done enough. Let's start by setting real, measurable goals. We can't expect this to be a passive change. Vanessa smiled. This was the breakthrough moment she had been waiting for. Exactly, she said. We need to be accountable. This isn't a one-time initiative. This is a permanent shift in the way we do business. And we're going to track our progress every step of the way. The conversation continued. But as it did, Vanessa could feel the momentum building. One by one, the leaders in the room were starting to see the potential for change. They were starting to understand that real progress wasn't just about good intentions, it was about action. And with every conversation, every meeting, the movement she had started was growing stronger. As the meeting came to a close, Vanessa felt a sense of fulfillment wash over her. The path ahead was still filled with challenges, but she was no longer walking it alone. She had built a coalition of like-minded leaders who were ready to make the change happen, and together, they would lead the way into a new era of business. Vanessa woke up early the next morning, the soft sunlight filtering through the blinds of her bedroom. The excitement from the previous day's meeting still buzzed in her chest. But now, as the reality of the task ahead settled in, she knew the hard work was far from over. She had rallied the industry's leaders, made her case, and set the wheels of change in motion. But the true test would be in the execution. Sitting up in bed, she glanced at her phone. The messages from Carla had piled up overnight, some congratulatory, some with updates on the progress of the new diversity initiatives. But there was one that caught her eye, an email from the company's legal team about a potential challenge to the diversity policies she had been pushing for. As she sipped her coffee and scrolled through the message, Vanessa felt a familiar fire stir within her. She wasn't naive. She knew that resistance to change was inevitable, but this felt different. This wasn't just about legal challenges or opposition. It was about the old guard fighting to maintain its grip on power. And that was something Vanessa was prepared to face head-on. She quickly typed a reply to Carla, requesting a meeting with the legal team. She needed to ensure that the policies they were working so hard to put in place were bulletproof and ready to withstand any challenge. Within hours, Vanessa was sitting across from her general counsel, a seasoned attorney named Greg, who had been with Summit Enterprises for years. "Greg," Vanessa said as she leaned forward, "I've been reading through the email you sent. What's the situation?" Greg, a man who had always been pragmatic, adjusted his glasses and sighed. "We've had some concerns raised by a few stakeholders. Some of them feel that the diversity policies you're implementing could lead to legal complications, things like reverse discrimination claims and violation of corporate fairness standards. It's nothing we can't handle, but it's a challenge nonetheless." Vanessa leaned back, her mind racing as she processed the information. "Are they right?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. "Is there any truth to these concerns?" Greg paused, clearly weighing his words before responding. "Technically, there's always a risk when you make such a significant shift in policy. But if we proceed carefully and make sure our implementation is legally sound, we can minimize that risk. It's going to require a lot of documentation, metrics, and transparency to prove that this is a legitimate effort to improve inclusion, not just an attempt to meet quotas." Vanessa nodded, her jaw tightening. She had been expecting this. When you challenge the status quo, there's always backlash, but she wasn't about to back down. "I don't want a watered-down version of these policies," she said, her voice steady. "We're going to push forward, but we need to be strategic. I want us to have the legal groundwork in place to withstand any challenges, but I also want to show the world that we're doing this because it's the right thing to do, not because we're forced to, but because we are leading by example." Greg looked at her, his expression one of respect mixed with admiration. "I'll make sure we get everything in order," he said. "We'll craft a strategy that's bulletproof, both legally and ethically." As Vanessa left the meeting, she couldn't help but feel a renewed sense of purpose. This wasn't just about implementing a diversity policy, it was about creating a movement that would challenge the entire corporate world to rethink its approach to leadership, power, and opportunity. She knew there would be obstacles, but she had already proven that she could handle whatever came her way. Over the next few weeks, Vanessa worked tirelessly with her legal and executive teams to ensure that every aspect of the new initiatives was airtight. They collected data, set up monitoring systems, and made sure that their actions were backed by solid research. Meanwhile, word about Summit Enterprises' groundbreaking efforts to address diversity and inclusion continued to spread. The company's reputation was becoming synonymous with progressive change, and Vanessa was being hailed as a leader in the fight for equality in the workplace. However, the opposition was also growing stronger. Some of the more traditional voices in the business world began to push back harder, arguing that Summit's initiatives were a threat to the meritocratic structure that had long defined corporate success. Vanessa knew this was inevitable. People who had benefited from the old system weren't going to just let it go. But the more they fought, the more determined she became to see this through. One morning, after a particularly heated debate in a public forum, Vanessa sat in her office, reflecting on the struggle. She had faced similar battles before when she had been dismissed, underestimated, and told that she didn't belong in certain spaces. But this time, the stakes were higher. This wasn't just about her career or her company. This was about setting a precedent for future generations. She was building something that would outlast her. The phone rang, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was Carla again. "Vanessa, we've just received another round of support from several major firms. They're publicly backing our initiatives and are ready to collaborate on a larger scale. The momentum is building, and the media is picking it up faster than we expected." Vanessa smiled, knowing that this was the turning point she had been waiting for. "This is it," she said. "We have to move faster. Let's push this further. It's time to start collaborating with our competitors, with other industries. We need to show that this isn't just an isolated effort. The world is ready for a transformation, and Summit Enterprises will lead it. Over the next few months, Vanessa expanded her reach. She traveled to other cities, spoke at conferences, and met with CEOs from various industries to share her vision for an inclusive corporate world. With each new partnership, the movement gained more traction. As Summit Enterprises grew, it became a model for others to follow. The corporate world that once resisted change was now beginning to embrace it, and Vanessa knew that her fight had only just begun. There was still much to do, but now, the momentum was on her side. The work she had started was turning into a global movement, one that would reshape the future of business forever. Vanessa sat in the boardroom, looking out the floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the city skyline. Summit Enterprises had come a long way since she had first laid the groundwork for change. The initiatives were in full swing now, and the ripple effect of her work had spread far beyond her company. As she reviewed the latest round of reports on employee satisfaction, diversity progress, and financial performance, she couldn't help but smile. The results spoke for themselves. Employee engagement had skyrocketed, the company's brand reputation was stronger than ever, and, most importantly, Summit Enterprises had become a beacon for other organizations eager to follow in their footsteps. The vision she had set in motion was no longer just her own, it was becoming a collective force, uniting people and businesses under a shared belief in fairness and opportunity. Her phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting her thoughts. It was a text from Carla. "We just got an invitation for you to speak at the United Nations Global Business Forum. They want you to lead a panel discussion on corporate responsibility and inclusivity. This is huge." Vanessa's heart raced with excitement. The United Nations. It was one thing to make waves in the corporate world. It was another to be invited to the global stage to discuss change on a worldwide scale. She immediately responded, typing, "Set it up. I'm ready." She knew this opportunity was bigger than just one speech. It was a chance to bring her message to the leaders who could influence entire nations. It was time to broaden the scope of the movement she had started and ensure that the impact was felt far beyond the boardrooms. The next few weeks flew by in a blur of preparation, meetings, and discussions with global leaders who were also committed to pushing the boundaries of inclusivity. Vanessa found herself speaking to heads of state, executives from multinational corporations, and non-governmental organizations who all shared a common goal: to create a more equitable world through business. She spent long nights perfecting her speech, knowing that this could be her most important message yet. As the day of the forum approached, Vanessa's excitement built. She knew that this wasn't just another opportunity to speak, it was the culmination of everything she had worked for, the chance to solidify her place as a leader in this global movement. When the day finally arrived, Vanessa entered the Grand Hall of the United Nations in New York City, her heart pounding with anticipation. The room was filled with dignitaries, diplomats, and business leaders from all corners of the globe. As she walked to the stage, she could feel the weight of the moment, the sense that this was her chance to change the world on a much larger scale. She stood at the podium, adjusting the microphone, and looked out at the sea of faces in the audience. The silence was palpable, every eye on her. She took a deep breath and began, her voice calm but resolute. "Good morning, everyone. It is an honor to be here today with so many leaders who are committed to making our world a better place. The business world has always been about power, profit, and influence. But today we are here to talk about something far more important: how we can use that power to create a more just, inclusive, and equitable world." She paused, allowing her words to sink in. For too long, the corporate world has operated under a set of rules that have excluded entire groups of people from opportunities. People who are qualified, capable, and driven but have been systematically overlooked due to their race, gender, or background. We've seen this happen time and time again, but it doesn't have to be this way. We are at a crossroads, and it is up to us to decide which direction we will take. Vanessa's words echoed through the hall, and she could feel the energy in the room shifting. She was speaking directly to the people who had the power to make a real difference, and they were listening. In the last few years, Summit Enterprises has begun to challenge the status quo. We've implemented policies that ensure that diversity and inclusion are not just buzzwords, but the foundation upon which we build our success. We've committed to a culture where everyone, regardless of their background, has the opportunity to rise and thrive. And the results have been undeniable. higher employee engagement, increased innovation, and a stronger bottom line. She paused again, scanning the room, meeting the eyes of the leaders who sat before her. But I am here today not just to talk about my company's success. I am here to call on all of you to join this movement. It's not enough for Summit Enterprises to succeed. We need every company, every organization, every leader to embrace this change. Because when we all do this together, the impact will be exponential. Vanessa's voice grew stronger, filled with conviction. We are all in positions of power. The decisions we make in the boardroom, the policies we implement, the cultures we create, they affect people's lives. They affect families, communities, and futures. The time for change is now, and it's up to us to lead that change. We cannot afford to wait any longer. We cannot afford to be complacent. The world is watching us, and the legacy we leave behind will be defined by the actions we take today. She could feel the room responding, the energy shifting from one of skepticism to one of commitment. People were beginning to understand. This was no longer just an issue for marginalized communities. This was an issue for everyone. It was about building a world where everyone had the chance to succeed. I'm not asking for your approval, Vanessa continued. I'm asking for your action. Let's commit to making real, lasting changes. Let's hold ourselves accountable. Let's create systems and cultures where inclusion is not just a goal, it's a reality. As she finished, the room erupted into applause. But Vanessa didn't need the applause. She didn't need the recognition. What mattered was that her message had landed. She had made the case for change to the world's most influential leaders, and now it was up to them to take action. As she stepped off the stage, Vanessa felt a deep sense of fulfillment. The movement was no longer just a dream, it was a reality, and it was growing, one company, one leader, and one action at a time. As the months passed, Vanessa found herself at the helm of an unstoppable movement. Summit Enterprises had become a model for the future of business, a company built not just on profits, but on principles of equality, fairness, and opportunity for all. The diversity and inclusion policies she had worked tirelessly to implement were not only improving the company's internal culture, but were also resonating throughout the business world. Other companies, inspired by Summit's success, began to adopt similar practices. They reached out to Vanessa for advice, wanting to replicate what she had done, and she shared her insights freely, knowing that the more businesses embraced these changes, the stronger the movement would become. But the work was far from over. Vanessa knew that the true measure of success was not just in the actions of the companies that followed Summit's lead, it was in the lasting impact on the industry as a whole. She wasn't content with just being a part of a trend. She wanted to build a foundation that would stand the test of time, a foundation that would ensure future generations would inherit a corporate world that valued people over profits. That vision was taking shape with each passing day. As Summit Enterprises continued to thrive, Vanessa made sure that the changes she had implemented were embedded deep within the organization's DNA. Employee resource groups flourished, mentorship programs were developed for underrepresented groups, and hiring practices became more transparent. She pushed for continuous feedback from employees to make sure that Summit was evolving with the needs of its workforce. Meanwhile, her influence had spread beyond the business world. She had become a sought-after speaker, invited to share her story and vision on stages around the world. The global business community was beginning to understand that success was no longer defined solely by financial performance, but by how well companies treated their employees, their communities, and the world at large. One day, while preparing for a keynote speech at an international conference on social responsibility, Vanessa received a call that caught her off guard. It was from Carla, her trusted assistant. "Vanessa, I've just received some unexpected news," Carla said, her tone a mixture of excitement and concern. "A major foundation wants to partner with us. They're offering a significant grant to support our initiatives, but there's one condition: they want us to take this to the next level. They want Summit Enterprises to lead a global coalition focused on advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the corporate sector." Vanessa sat back in her chair, processing the magnitude of the offer. A global coalition? The possibilities were immense. But with that kind of responsibility came an even greater challenge. She wasn't just leading Summit anymore, she was being asked to lead the charge on a global scale. "I want to know everything," she said, her voice steady. "Every detail. This is a huge decision." We need to ensure that we're ready to take this on. After getting all the information from Carla, Vanessa met with her leadership team to discuss the proposal. The room was filled with energy as they debated the pros and cons. While the grant was a significant opportunity, they knew it would require careful planning and strategic execution. "We've already established ourselves as a leader in this space," Vanessa said as she addressed her team. "But this coalition, this is different. It's not just about us anymore. It's about the entire business world and how we can collectively create real change. We need to ensure that we're equipped to handle this responsibility. We need to make sure that we're not just setting an example. We need to show the world that we can bring about systemic change." Her words resonated deeply with her team. They were ready. Summit had built the foundation, and now it was time to expand that vision globally. The team agreed to move forward with the proposal, and the next steps were set into motion. Over the following weeks, Summit Enterprises began to form partnerships with other companies, foundations, and organizations around the world. Vanessa's vision for a global coalition focused on advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion began to take shape. Summit was no longer just a company, it was becoming a movement that was starting to affect businesses worldwide. The momentum was building, and with each new partnership, Vanessa felt the power of the collective effort grow. Her leadership had created a ripple effect that was expanding far beyond what she could have ever imagined. The coalition was officially announced at a global summit in Europe, and the response was overwhelming. Business leaders from every continent were eager to join the effort, pledging their commitment to making the corporate world a more inclusive place for everyone. As Vanessa stood on the stage, speaking to a room filled with thousands of the most influential leaders in the world, she realized just how far she had come. She was no longer just fighting for change, she was leading a global transformation. The applause that followed her speech felt different this time. It wasn't just applause for her, it was applause for the movement she had created, for the vision she had fought for, and for the future she was helping to build. The impact of her work had gone far beyond what she had ever imagined. It had become a force that was shaping the future of business itself. As she left the stage, Vanessa felt an overwhelming sense of pride. But even more than that, she felt a deep sense of responsibility. The work was far from over. The coalition was just beginning, and there was still so much to be done. But now, with the support of a global network of like-minded leaders, she knew they could achieve the impossible. The world was changing, and Vanessa Clark was at the forefront of that change, leading the way toward a new era of business, a world where inclusivity, equality, and opportunity were the new standard. And she was determined to see it through, no matter what it took. Vanessa stood at the helm of a new world. What had begun as a single idea, an ambition to reshape the way business was done, had now blossomed into a global movement. Summit Enterprises was no longer just a company. It had become a beacon for change, a symbol of what was possible when leadership embraced diversity, inclusion, and fairness. But as the world looked to her for inspiration, Vanessa knew the road ahead would only grow more complex. The coalition she had formed with leaders from all over the world had started to make tangible strides. Summit was the example. But now, the true challenge lay in the sustained effort needed to push this movement into the future. As the months passed, Vanessa found herself meeting with CEOs, policymakers, and global leaders more frequently than ever before. She spoke at conferences, appeared in media outlets, and consulted with governments on how to implement inclusive policies. Everywhere she went, the conversation was the same. How could businesses build a truly inclusive future? How could the corporate world ensure that everyone, regardless of race, gender, or socioeconomic status, had an equal opportunity to thrive? These conversations were becoming more common, but that didn't mean they were easy. The corporate world was still full of deep-rooted biases, and many companies were unwilling to change their ways. Vanessa understood that some resistance would always exist, but she also knew that with each new partnership and each new initiative, the tide was shifting. Summit Enterprises continued to evolve, and Vanessa made sure that the company stayed ahead of the curve. She implemented new systems of accountability with clear benchmarks to track progress on diversity and inclusion. These weren't just lofty goals, they were actionable, measurable objectives. And each time Summit hit a new milestone, the company shared that success with the world, ensuring that other businesses could follow suit. Her commitment to transparency became one of the company's core values, and it had earned Summit immense respect from employees, clients, and competitors alike. Yet, despite the progress, Vanessa never lost sight of the obstacles still in front of her. She knew that the world she was striving to create wouldn't be built in a day. It would take years, even decades, for the corporate world to truly reflect the diversity and equality that she envisioned. But she also knew that she was already changing the conversation, already rewriting the rules. It wasn't just about Summit Enterprises, it was about creating a world where fairness wasn't an exception, but the norm. One day, as Vanessa sat in her office reflecting on the journey she had been on, Carla entered with a news update. "Vanessa, I've just received confirmation. The World Economic Forum has invited you to speak at the next summit in Davos. They want you to be part of a panel on the future of corporate leadership in a changing world." Vanessa smiled, a sense of pride swelling inside her. The invitation was another acknowledgement of the impact she was making, but she didn't let the praise distract her. "I'll be there," Vanessa replied, her mind already thinking about what she wanted to say. The World Economic Forum was one of the most prestigious gatherings of leaders from government, business, and civil society. To be invited was a validation of everything she had fought for, and the perfect opportunity to amplify her message. As the event in Davos approached, Vanessa spent days preparing. She knew that this was another pivotal moment in her journey. She wasn't just going to talk about her company or her own success. She was going to challenge the entire world of business to step up. She wanted to inspire those in power to think differently, to act differently. And more than anything, she wanted to leave a legacy that would echo for generations to come. The day of the forum arrived, and Vanessa stood before a crowd of world leaders, business magnates, and influential thinkers. The weight of the moment was heavy, but Vanessa was ready. As she walked to the podium, she noticed the eyes of everyone in the room on her. This was her stage, her moment, and she wasn't going to waste it. She looked out at the sea of faces before her and began. "We stand at a crossroads in history. The future of business is being shaped right now, and it's being shaped by people like us. For too long, we've worked within a system that has prioritized profit over people, efficiency over empathy, and power over equality. But the world is changing, and it's time for business to change with it." Her voice was steady, but there was an undeniable force behind her words. The business world cannot continue to operate under the same old rules. We can no longer turn a blind eye to the fact that entire communities have been excluded, that talented individuals have been overlooked simply because they didn't fit the mold. The future we want to build must be one where opportunity is available to everyone, regardless of where they come from or what they look like. The room was silent, the audience hanging on her every word. Vanessa continued, "This isn't just about doing the right thing. This is about business. This is about growth, innovation, and sustainability. When we allow everyone to rise, when we create an environment where every voice is heard and every talent is nurtured, we unlock the true potential of our companies. Diversity is not just a moral imperative, it is an economic one." She paused, allowing the weight of her message to settle. "I stand before you not as someone who has succeeded in spite of the system, but as someone who has succeeded because I've challenged it. I've built a company that is stronger, more innovative, and more profitable because we value people, not just profits. And I'm here to tell you that you can do the same. But it requires a commitment to real change, not just the easy changes that look good on paper, but the hard changes that require us to rethink the very way we do business." Vanessa's words rang out through the hall, reverberating off the walls. The future of leadership is inclusive. The future of business is equitable. And the future of our world depends on how we embrace that truth. As she finished, the room erupted in applause. Vanessa stood there, humbled but resolute. This wasn't just a victory for her, it was a victory for everyone who believed in the power of change. The path she had set out on was far from finished, but now, the entire world was watching, and they were ready to follow. As she left the stage, Vanessa knew that this moment was the beginning of something much bigger. The world was changing, and she was leading it one company, one leader, and one action at a time. Vanessa stood on the balcony of her office, the city sprawling below her. The skyline, once a symbol of the corporate world's power and privilege, now felt like a reflection of her own journey, a journey that had not only defied the odds, but had redefined the way business was done. Summit Enterprises had become a shining example of what was possible when leadership embraced inclusivity and fairness. The company's success wasn't just measured in profits, it was measured in the lives they impacted, the communities they uplifted, and the businesses that followed in their footsteps. But as Vanessa looked out at the city, she knew that the work was far from over. The corporate world had changed in some ways, but the systems of inequality, exclusion, and bias still ran deep. It would take more than just one company, more than just one movement, to dismantle those systems. It would take a collective effort, a global shift in mindset. Vanessa had known this from the beginning. She had known that the changes she was leading at Summit Enterprises were just the start of something much bigger. She had seen how companies from all over the world were beginning to take notice, how the coalition she had helped form was growing stronger every day. But now, as she prepared for the next phase of the movement, she understood that this was a long-term battle, one that required sustained effort, vision, and leadership. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she glanced down to see a message from Carla. "We've got an update on the new partnerships. Things are moving quickly. The international expansion is almost ready to roll out. The team is ready, but we need your final approval." Vanessa smiled. It was a reminder of how far they had come. The plans for Summit's global expansion were in motion. Soon, the company's values of diversity, equity, and inclusion would be shared with businesses on every continent. This was no longer just an effort to change a single company. It was about reshaping the global corporate landscape. Vanessa texted back quickly, "Approve it. Let's go global." The next few months were a blur of international meetings, negotiations, and strategy sessions. Summit Enterprises began working with multinational organizations, governments, and nonprofits to implement their inclusive business practices on a global scale. As Summit expanded, so did the coalition. What had started as a few companies committing to diversity and inclusion had now turned into a powerful global network. Business leaders from Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas joined the movement, sharing resources, ideas, and strategies to build a world where inclusion wasn't just a goal, it was the standard. But not everyone was on board with the rapid changes. The more success the coalition had, the louder the voices of opposition became. There were critics who argued that focusing on diversity and inclusion took away from a company's ability to compete, that it created more challenges than it solved. Vanessa had heard these criticisms before, but now they seemed louder, more intense. She knew that this was a natural part of any transformative movement. Resistance was inevitable. What mattered was how they responded. The pressure mounted. She could feel it in the late-night meetings, the long strategy calls with partners, the constant juggling of responsibilities. But each time doubt crept in, Vanessa reminded herself of the larger vision, the long-term impact they were creating. She wasn't just leading a company, she was leading a global shift, and that shift would take time. Summit Enterprises continued to lead by example, setting higher standards, pushing for better practices, and demanding accountability from its partners. But Vanessa knew that true, lasting change couldn't happen just within the corporate world. It needed to be supported by policy, by education, and by a cultural shift that ran deeper than the business sector. So, she began to shift her focus even more, meeting with lawmakers, pushing for laws that supported diversity and equal opportunity, and making sure that businesses could not just claim to be inclusive, but would be held accountable for making real, measurable progress. It was at a meeting with a group of policymakers in Washington, D.C., that Vanessa found herself standing at the crossroads of what could be her most impactful moment yet. She had been invited to discuss corporate responsibility at a national policy forum, and the pressure of the moment weighed heavily on her. This was more than just another speech. This was her chance to use her platform to advocate for change on a systemic level. When she stepped up to the podium, the room fell silent. Lawmakers, business leaders, and advocates all looked at her, waiting for her to speak. Vanessa knew this was her moment. She could feel the weight of her responsibility, but she also felt the power of the change that was already in motion. She took a deep breath and began. "We stand at a crucial point in history," she said, her voice steady but strong. "The corporate world is evolving, but we must recognize that these changes cannot happen in isolation. They must be supported by policies that ensure equal opportunities for everyone, policies that protect against discrimination and promote fairness in the workplace." She paused for a moment, letting her words sink in. "For too long, our legal and political systems have allowed businesses to operate in ways that have excluded entire groups of people. This isn't just a moral issue, it's an economic one. When we fail to include people, we lose out on talent, innovation, and growth. We leave millions of people on the sidelines, and when we do that, we all lose. She scanned the room, meeting the eyes of the policymakers. If we are to build a future where every person can thrive, we need more than just voluntary corporate initiatives. We need policies that mandate fairness, that incentivize companies to prioritize inclusion, and that ensure accountability at every level. This is the only way we can create a system where merit and potential are the only things that matter. Vanessa could feel the energy shift in the room. She had said it. She had put it all on the line. The response from the audience was immediate. Some nodded, others scribbled notes, and a few looked skeptical. But Vanessa didn't let that stop her. She wasn't here to make everyone comfortable. She was here to push for change, to challenge the system, and to make sure that future generations of workers had an equal shot at success. As the meeting ended, the room erupted in applause, and Vanessa knew she had made her mark. The work was far from finished, but she had done what she set out to do. She had made the conversation about inclusion, fairness, and opportunity impossible to ignore. Vanessa sat in her office late one evening, reflecting on the tremendous journey she had been on. Summit Enterprises had grown far beyond anything she could have imagined, and the global coalition she had helped create was gaining momentum by the day. The business world was changing, and the impact of their efforts was becoming more evident by the hour. Yet, despite the successes and the accolades, Vanessa knew that this was just the beginning. There was still much work to be done. The systems of inequality were deeply entrenched in the corporate world, and shifting them would require more than just a few successful initiatives. It would require a seismic cultural shift. And that shift had to happen on a global scale. As she reflected on her next steps, she realized that the focus had to extend beyond just business leaders and policymakers. It had to involve communities, the very people who had been excluded from opportunities for so long. The future of this movement wasn't just about companies adapting to diversity and inclusion policies. It was about empowering people to create the change themselves. She picked up the phone and dialed Carla. "Carla, we need to do more for the community. I've been thinking about how we can bring this movement into the grassroots level." Carla listened carefully, knowing that when Vanessa had a vision, it was always ambitious. "What do you have in mind?" she asked. Vanessa leaned back in her chair, her mind racing with possibilities. "We need to create a program that empowers the next generation of leaders, young people from underserved communities, who need the resources and support to break through the barriers they face. I want to build a network of mentorships, internships, and educational opportunities that give them access to the kind of guidance and experience that will help them rise to the top. We need to show them that the corporate world isn't just something they watch from the outside, it's something they can be a part of." Carla's voice was filled with excitement. "That sounds incredible, Vanessa. I think this could really be the next step in what we're doing, but we'll need a solid plan to execute it." "I know," Vanessa replied. "We'll need partnerships with schools, universities, and nonprofits. We need to ensure that the program reaches the right people and that it has long-term impact. Let's start by identifying the communities where we can make the most difference." Over the next few months, Vanessa worked tirelessly with Carla and the team to launch the new initiative. They called it the Next Generation Leadership Program, and its mission was clear: to create a pathway for young people from underserved communities to gain access to the corporate world and become the leaders of tomorrow. Summit Enterprises partnered with local organizations, schools, and universities in cities across the country to provide mentorship, internships, and scholarships. The program was designed to give students not only the skills they needed to succeed in business, but also the confidence to challenge the system that had held them back for so long. It wasn't just about offering opportunities. It was about changing the way young people saw themselves in the business world. They weren't just the future of the workforce, they were the future of leadership. As the program began to take shape, Vanessa made it a point to visit schools and community centers herself. She spoke to young people who had never imagined a career in business was possible for them, sharing her own story and encouraging them to believe in their potential. It was in these moments, standing before students eager to hear about her journey, that Vanessa felt the most connected to the purpose of her work. She wasn't just reshaping an industry, she was reshaping lives. In a meeting with the program's leadership team, Vanessa expressed her vision for the program's future. "This is about more than just numbers. It's about giving people the tools to rewrite their own stories, to break the cycles that have kept them from seeing themselves as capable of achieving anything. We want these young people to know that they belong, that they have something to offer, and that the doors they've been kept out of can and will open. The program quickly gained traction, with hundreds of students applying for the mentorships and internships. Many of them had never considered business as a career before, but now they saw it as an attainable goal. As the first group of students completed their internships at Summit Enterprises, the results were undeniable. The students didn't just bring fresh perspectives, they brought innovation, passion, and a hunger to prove themselves. Vanessa knew they were going to be the trailblazers of the next generation. The impact of the program went beyond the students themselves. The company's culture was evolving in real time, as employees from all backgrounds came together to mentor the young leaders. These connections were strengthening Summit Enterprises from within, creating a more dynamic and inclusive workplace. But Vanessa didn't stop there. She knew that for the program to have lasting change, it needed to be sustainable. So, she worked to establish partnerships with other major corporations, encouraging them to adopt similar programs, to invest in the potential of young people from underserved communities. Over time, these efforts began to bear fruit, and more companies began to follow Summit's lead, creating their own initiatives that gave young people the chance to succeed. It was a movement that was spreading, one partnership at a time. As the years went by, Vanessa continued to watch the impact of the Next Generation Leadership Program. Many of the students who had gone through the program had gone on to become successful leaders in their own right. Some of them were now working at Summit Enterprises, contributing to the very policies that had given them a chance. Vanessa knew that this was the most significant part of her legacy. The ripple effect of the program was going to be felt for generations. And though there was still so much work to be done, she was proud of the progress they had made. Summit Enterprises was no longer just a company. It was a symbol of what could be achieved when business embraced its true responsibility to the world. And as the movement continued to grow, Vanessa knew that the real power wasn't just in the policies they had changed or the opportunities they had created. The real power was in the lives that had been transformed, the barriers that had been shattered, and the generations of leaders who would follow in their footsteps. The years rolled forward, and with each one, the world seemed to move a little closer to the vision Vanessa had always believed in. Summit Enterprises had become an institution, a model of how leadership rooted in empathy, fairness, and integrity could redefine what success meant. The Next Generation Leadership Program had expanded beyond the borders of the United States, reaching young people in Europe, Africa, and Asia. What began as a small initiative had evolved into a global network of mentorship and empowerment. Thousands of young leaders were rising through the ranks of major corporations, fueled by the principles that Vanessa had built her legacy upon. Yet even with all the progress, Vanessa remained vigilant. She knew that complacency was the greatest enemy of progress. Every time she saw a new report on diversity statistics or economic inequality, she was reminded that there was still so much work to be done. True change required constant effort, and she refused to let the movement lose momentum. One crisp autumn morning, as she arrived at Summit's headquarters, Carla greeted her with a folder in hand. "Vanessa, we just got word from the International Business Review," she said with a grin. "They're naming you Business Leader of the Decade." Vanessa chuckled softly, taking the folder. "Leader of the Decade? That sounds like a Lifetime Achievement Award disguised as flattery," she said, smiling. Carla shook her head. "You've earned it. They're honoring you for transforming the corporate world, for proving that leadership and compassion can coexist." Vanessa paused, looking out through the glass walls of her office at the bustling city below. "I appreciate the recognition," she said, her voice thoughtful. "But the real reward is seeing these changes actually stick. Awards fade. Legacies live through people." Carla nodded, understanding. "That's exactly why your story matters. People need to see that leadership can look like this." Vanessa smiled, her gaze still fixed on the skyline. "Then let's make sure the story keeps going." Later that day, Vanessa stood before a room full of employees, some veterans who had been with her since the early days, and others young, fresh faces who had been inspired by her vision. She looked at them and saw the embodiment of everything she had fought for. "When we started this journey," she began, "we weren't just trying to change a company, we were trying to change a mindset. We were fighting for a world where opportunity isn't dictated by appearance, by gender, or by background. We've come so far, but we cannot stop here. Every generation has to keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible." her voice carried with conviction, echoing through the hall. The next chapter of Summit Enterprises belongs to you. Continue to innovate, continue to stand for justice, and continue to lead with empathy. Remember that leadership is not about control, it's about responsibility. And responsibility means leaving the world better than you found it. The room filled with applause, but Vanessa's focus was on the faces in front of her, the future she had helped build. That evening, she stayed behind long after everyone else had gone home, walking through the quiet halls of the company that had become her life's work. The portraits of past leaders hung on the walls, but it was the photos of community events, mentorship programs, and team milestones that drew her attention. They told a story that no award could ever capture, the story of transformation, resilience, and unity. Standing by the large window of her office, Vanessa looked out at the city lights flickering like stars below her. For a long moment, she said nothing. Then, softly, she whispered, "We did it. But the work goes on." She knew that her journey was nearing a new stage. The movement no longer needed her to lead every step. It was thriving, alive, and growing in the hands of the next generation. That was the true measure of her success. The fire she had started all those years ago was now a torch carried by countless others, lighting the way toward a more equal, more compassionate world. And as she turned off the lights and stepped into the night, Vanessa Clark felt a deep sense of peace. The fight had been long, but the change was real, and it would endure. As the years passed, Vanessa's influence continued to grow. But she knew that change, no matter how impactful, was never a destination, it was a journey. Summit Enterprises had become an international example of inclusive leadership, and the Next Generation Leadership Program had expanded to every corner of the globe, creating a powerful network of future leaders who had been empowered to break down barriers and build their own success stories. The movement that Vanessa had started was now an unstoppable force, shaping industries, communities, and entire economies. Yet, despite all the progress, Vanessa remained focused on the horizon. She wasn't interested in resting on her laurels. She was determined to ensure that the momentum would carry far beyond her time in charge. Summit Enterprises was a reflection of her vision, but her vision was always larger than the company itself. It was about creating a world where leadership was based on merit, integrity, and empathy, not just tradition or status. It was about a world where people weren't just given opportunities, they were given the tools and the platform to succeed, regardless of their background or circumstances. The world was changing, but the systems that had created inequality were deeply rooted. And while Summit Enterprises had made incredible strides, Vanessa knew that real change needed to come from every sector, from every corner of society. One day, as she sat in her office, preparing for a meeting with a group of young leaders who had just completed their internships through the Next Generation Leadership Program, she felt a sense of calm wash over her. The work was far from over, but there was a sense of fulfillment that came with knowing she had built something that would continue to evolve long after she was gone. As she reviewed the notes for the upcoming meeting, Carla walked in with a warm smile. "Vanessa, we've just received an invitation to the United Nations Climate Summit. They want you to speak about the intersection of corporate responsibility and environmental sustainability." Vanessa raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "The United Nations? That's a big one. What's the angle?" Carla nodded. "They want to highlight the role that corporations play in addressing global challenges, not just in terms of profit, but in how they integrate sustainability and equity into their practices. They've seen how Summit Enterprises has become a leader in this space and want you to share your vision for the future." Vanessa thought for a moment. The opportunity was significant, but it also felt like a natural next step. The corporate world's responsibility to the planet and to people was something that she had always believed in, even when it wasn't popular. She knew this was another chance to expand her message, to show that sustainable business practices and social responsibility weren't just ethical choices, they were necessary for the survival and prosperity of the world. "I'll do it," she said, her decision clear. "Let's make sure the world knows that business can be both profitable and responsible. It's not an either divided by or, it's a must for the future." In the weeks that followed, Vanessa worked diligently on her speech for the United Nations Climate Summit. She focused on the idea that businesses could not afford to ignore environmental issues, especially if they were to thrive in the coming decades. She framed it not as an altruistic choice, but as a strategic one. Companies that embraced sustainability, not just in their operations but in their core values, would be the ones leading the way in the next century. Climate change is a reality, she would say in her speech. And it's not just about what we do to the environment, it's about the future of our people, the future of our children, the future of our communities. Business as usual isn't an option. We have the opportunity, the responsibility, to create a new kind of corporate world, one that leads not just in profits, but in its care for the planet and its people. The day of the summit arrived, and Vanessa stood before a global audience of leaders, activists, and experts, ready to share her message. The room was filled with the world's most influential thinkers, and she could feel the weight of the moment. This was her opportunity to make a difference on a truly global scale, to ensure that sustainability wasn't just a buzzword but a driving force in the business world. As she spoke, Vanessa emphasized the idea that sustainability was not a trend, it was an essential part of a company's future success. She shared stories of how Summit Enterprises had worked to reduce its environmental impact while increasing profits, proving that doing good for the planet was also doing good for business. She called on the leaders in the room to invest in a future that valued both people and the planet. "This is not a choice for the future," she said, her voice strong and clear. "This is the reality we live in today. We cannot separate the health of our world from the health of our economy. If we do, we will all fail. But if we unite, if we embrace responsibility, if we commit to a world where the well-being of the planet and the people who live on it is at the heart of our business practices, then we will create a future that is truly sustainable." The room was silent for a moment, and then, as her words sank in, the audience erupted into applause. Vanessa felt a sense of pride swell within her as she stood there, knowing that the future she had always dreamed of was becoming a reality. The work wasn't over, but she had taken another step toward creating the world she envisioned, a world where business, people, and the planet could thrive together. As she left the stage, she knew the movement was unstoppable and that it would continue to grow long after she had passed on the torch. As Vanessa looked out from the balcony of her office one last time, she felt a quiet sense of accomplishment settle over her. The city below seemed to shimmer with possibility, reflecting the change that had already taken root in the business world. Summit Enterprises had become something far beyond what she had imagined when she first took the helm. It was no longer just a company, it was a symbol of the future, a future where inclusion, sustainability, and equality were the pillars on which business success was built. The Next Generation Leadership Program had flourished, with countless young leaders stepping up to continue the work she had started, and the global coalition she had formed was now a force for real change across industries and continents. The movement was no longer hers alone, it had spread, woven into the fabric of companies, communities, and governments everywhere. As she prepared to pass on the leadership of Summit Enterprises to the next generation, Vanessa knew that the legacy she had created would live on. The board had already identified a successor, someone with the same values and drive to push the company forward. Vanessa had made sure that Summit's culture and mission would continue, no matter who took the reins. The impact of the movement was undeniable, but for Vanessa, the true measure of success wasn't in the accolades or the awards, it was in the lives that had been changed, the barriers that had been broken, and the opportunities that had been created for people who had been left out of the conversation for far too long. She had always believed that leadership wasn't about control, it was about service, about giving others the chance to rise, and now she could see the fruits of that belief. The world had already started to change, and she had helped lead the charge. The company's success was a reflection of the real, lasting change that had been made in the corporate landscape, but more importantly, it was a testament to the individuals who had risen to the occasion and made a difference in their own right. Summit Enterprises was no longer just a business. It was a movement that had inspired thousands of leaders and millions of people around the world. She had done what she set out to do, and now it was time to pass the baton. Sitting in her office, she took a moment to reflect on the journey. There had been struggles, challenges, moments of doubt, but there had also been victories, moments of clarity, and countless small victories that had led to something far greater than she had ever imagined. She had built something that would endure, not just for the sake of business, but for the sake of humanity. As the final decision was made to transition her out of the day-to-day leadership role, Vanessa felt a sense of peace. The new leadership at Summit Enterprises would continue the work she had started, and the movement would carry on. She had given everything she had to build this change, and now it was time for the next chapter, one that would see others rise to carry the torch forward. The phone rang, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Carla. Vanessa, the new leadership team is in place. They're ready. It's time for the next step. We're officially passing the torch, and the legacy you've built will live on. Vanessa smiled, a sense of calm washing over her. Thank you, Carla, she replied. I'm ready, and I'm so proud of everything we've accomplished. As the conversation ended, Vanessa looked out the window once more, knowing that the work she had started would continue to grow. The world was in the hands of the next generation, and they were ready to carry the mission forward, just as she had done. And with that, Vanessa took a final breath, knowing that her part in this story had come full circle. The movement was unstoppable now. Change had become a way of life, and the world, as she had always envisioned, was one step closer to a future where opportunity, fairness, and inclusion were not just ideals, they were a reality. And that reality would last for generations to come.